Hello and welcome back. It's Simple Tech, and today we are going to dive into our new topic, that is JavaScript. We are going to learn about JavaScript, and we are going to learn how we can integrate it in our website as we learned in the previous video. In the previous video, we talked about HTML and a bit of CSS, though we never talked deeper into CSS. But today I decided to mark this tutorial as our transition to our new way of learning JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And that is by going to use some library for UIs. And as you can predict, we are going to learn about React for UI, how we are going to use ReactJS, which is a JavaScript library for us to get started with creating smooth and nice UIs using React. So this tutorial today is going to help us to learn the basics that we need to get started with React. For this instance, we are going to dive into the basic knowledge of JavaScript for React. And JavaScript is a programming language like any other that has its own way of writing the syntax. That is declaring variables, using conditionals, defining the flow of the program, and everything that you can script for your front end or maybe for your backend. Later we are going to learn about how we can use JavaScript for backend. But for this tutorial, I'm going to use my knowledge to help you understand a bit of JavaScript that will help us to get started with React. So in JavaScript, we have its own syntax. We are going to start from as simple as creating a variable. In JavaScript, if you wanted to create a variable, you have to use keywords. Keywords are reserved words in any programming language that are used to perform different functionality. For this instance, for scripting in JavaScript, we have the keyword const, we have the keyword var, we have the keyword let. The three keywords are used to define variables. For example, const is used to define variables that have values which are not going to change later in the program, and you cannot have another variable of the same variable name anywhere within our program. For example, if I decide to have a variable name and while declaring a constant, it has its constraint. You have to declare the variable and immediately assign it some value. Otherwise, it's going to yell at you. As we can see here, it's having us an error that we have defined a constant, we have not declared, we have had a declaration, but it has no initialization for that variable. For this instance, we are going to assign it, for example, to Tony. And at this point, we have declared a variable that is not going to change anywhere within our program, named name, that is going to store our name for this program, for example, if we wanted to do that. But if I can have a variable defined by the keyword var, we can say, for example, we want to define age here, and this age we can assign it, or we can just leave it so that we can assign it later in the program. But if we just create that keyword var using keyword var and you define the age, we have created a variable. Same applies to the let. For this instance, let me for example declare maybe a religion for this variable here. So we've defined how we can create a variable in JavaScript. And now we are going to dive into our next step in JavaScript. That is the use of functions. Functions, these are code of blocks that are declared starting with the keyword function and then the function name, and we provide the parentheses to make it a function, so that we have the curly braces for us to create the body of that function. For this instance, let me say we want to define a function that is called we use the keyword function, and then we write the function name, say my function, and then this my function, we are going to have the parentheses, which is going to tell us that this is a function in JavaScript, and we cannot have a function that doesn't have any body, because in the body section is where we define what our function is going to do. For example, if in this program I just wanted to display maybe a text hello world, in JavaScript we use the predefined functions that are there. For example, for this instance, if I want to display something, it uses a console. It uses a console to display its data. For example, I can use the keyword console and then .log. It's an object. It's a function with a it's an object with a function log that is going to display for us, say hello world as a string, hello world. So this function, if I invoke this function as we've declared here, it's not going to do anything unless we invoke it, unless we call it, unless we just ignite it for it to start executing. It means somewhere this is the declaration part. For example, if I can just write here declaration of the function. But if I want to use it, I have to invoke it. To invoke it somewhere within our program. By invoking it, I just have to call the function name, that is my function. For example, let me copy it and paste it here, and then you add the parentheses. So if this program was attached to an HTML file, this function is going to be executed because we've invoked it somewhere in our program. And these functions in JavaScript are defined using different ways. Somebody can decide to define a function using the keyword function, and then the function name, and then the body. Somebody else is going to define a function. This is a normal way of defining a function. But we have a function that is an arrow function for this instance. These are functions that for this instant we can say for example a function, we can have it as function, and then we have the parentheses, and this function is going to be assigned the body for this instance. No, we just have an arrow function. An arrow function is when somebody decides to define a function that is assigned to a variable for this instance. But this function, you have to use the function keyword. We are going to learn how we cannot use, we can also use an arrow function that minus us using the keyword function. For this instance, say I define a const function, and then const, for example, a function that does not change. Let me call it my function 2, and this function 2, I assign it to a function that I do not give a name. That is a function keyword and then the parentheses for the function, and then this function I just assign it to the body, like this. You see, this is a function that I've assigned to this keyword my function 2 as the function, and then I can have to console.log say hello world. for this instance. I just misspelled hello world in the first case. So this is another way of defining a function. You just create a variable. To each you assign an anonymous function. Let me say it, because you are going to look at how anonymous functions are also declared. But for this case, we are defining a function, but we don't give it a name, but we assign it to a function with a name, to a variable with a name. So if I come here and invoke the function, I must use the name of the function for this instance. So if I come here and invoke my function 2, we are going to have the logic. For example, if I console log here hello world 2, if I run this code, it's first of all going to execute the first function that is going to display for us hello world. The second function is going to be invoked when we call my function 2, that is a function assigned to this variable, and then it's going to execute its logic here. As you can see, it's going to it's going to display on the console hello world 2. The third way, this is in fact, this is how we can assign a function to a variable, then we use it. Now the third way that is going to be common for us while we are using React is an arrow function. An arrow function is similar to a function assigned to a variable, but we eliminate the keyword function. For this instance, I can have const. I like using const because of various reasons we learn later in the course. So I define const, my function 3 for this instance is equals to only parentheses. I have to define only parentheses. These parentheses are going to hold data for this function. I have to have the parentheses. Then we assign it to an arrow function. This is what we call an arrow for this function. So this arrow function is pointing to the body of the body of that function. That is where we are going to write the logic. For this instance, we can console.log, that is hello world 3 for this instance. And for me to invoke this function, it's if I declared this way and I have to run this code on my browser, the function that are going to be executed is the first function, and is the first function because we've invoked it, and the second function because we invoked it. But the third function is going to be executed, is not going to be executed. Why? Because we've not invoked it. So we have to invoke it somewhere within our code for us to get the logic for the function to be executed this way. And as at this point, we have learned what a variable is. A variable is a storage location reserved for some, you reserve some memory for some for some data you are going to store. Secondly, we've learned about functions. We have different way of defining function, and we say the function is a block of code, I mean, that is executed upon its it's invoked upon its call somewhere within the code. So we declared a function here. We had to declare the logic for that function using the keyword function and then the function name, and then we had the parentheses and then the body of that function. Secondly, we just decided to define the function minus the function name. But this function, we've assigned it to a variable with a name, that is my function 2. This my function 2 is the variable name for the function that we've created that didn't had a function name. For this instance, this is function 2, as you can see here. And the third function is a function that does not use the keyword function, but it has only parentheses, and the function is assigned, like the second one, to a variable of a const, to a const variable, that is a constant variable called my function 3. And this declaration is not going to be executed Why? Because we've not invoked it somewhere within our program. And below here, we just provided the invokes for each function for this case. Here we've just invoked them continuously, but we may have it invoked somewhere else within our code. Now we transition to the next knowledge that is going to be useful for us during our React development or during our JavaScript development. We are going to use what we call ternary operators. Ternary operators, these are logics or conditions that we execute provided that some condition is met, or provided some of the condition is not met. For this instance, maybe I use a simple example. We have the if function here, which we are going to have here the condition, and then we have the code of block to be executed, if true. Else, if this condition is not met or is not true, we are going to have the else, which is when we have the condition as false, the code of block is going to be executed is in the else section of the code. For this instance, code to be executed if false. For this instance, we are going to look at how we can invert this. For example, if we want to execute the first code in case the condition is false, we are going to add this exclamation mark. This is a note. We are just going to say if not condition, then we execute the first code of block. But if I leave it this way, we are going to have a logical error, because we just have to execute the first code if the condition is true. So if I remove the exclamation, it means the condition must be true for us to execute. Yeah. For example, if I can say maybe we are testing for maybe a username is equal to a user. For example, say we got data from somewhere, user.username. If say user is equals to user.username, we can fetch the for example, if somebody was using the email, we can fetch all the data for that user and then we test it within the block. But if it's not, we are going to execute the second code of block. Maybe tell the user the username provided is invalid for this case. But this is going to accumulate 4 lines of code or maybe more if this code was just simple, or maybe it was just to tell us the username does not match, the username matches. How can we minimize this? We are going to use what we call ternary operators. Our first example is symbolized by this ampersand, the 2 ampersands. It means if the condition is met, then we are going to execute it. For this instance, I can say we will just write the logic username is equal to user.username, and then we write these 2 ampersand, and then we write the code of block here, code if let me just write it as a code if true. You see, so this code is only going to be executed only if the code meets the condition. Otherwise, it's going to give us an error, or maybe continue with other execution with an error that this condition was not met. How can we have the else condition within this our code? For example, we are going to introduce now the second type of the ternary operator, that is the question mark after the condition. We are going to say condition and then the question mark, then code to be executed if true. And we are going to use this full colon to divide the else, to define the else code of block. which means if this condition is met, then the first code here is going to be executed. But if the condition is not met, we are going to code to be executed if false for this instance. For example, I can use this example above. We can just say user name. Let me copy this instead of typing it again. We are just having if a user matches username, user.username fetched maybe from the database, we are just going to write this question mark, then we can say console dot log, or maybe some other logic that you need to execute in case it's true. So we say found a match, found a match, found, or we say record found for this our case. Otherwise, if the record is not found, we just define now the else code of block. We are going to console dot log that we never found the code, same record not found for this our case here. So this code of block is going to take only one line, that, and we are going to use this code where we don't have much to execute for the conditions. Say if we wanted to display the sign up button in case the user has or maybe say we are going to submit data for the sign up button in case we are in the sign up page. But if you want to toggle the sign up button such that if we are in the login page, we don't have to write sign up, we just have to display the login. If we are in the login page, in the sign up page, we are not going to display the login. Like we just toggle it. It's going to be useful a lot during our development with React. We also have this other operator, that is the OR operator. This one, it is just some two vertical lines. For this instance, say if we had to compare username, for example this, and then we say if this one is equals to maybe we say we have to compare these two, this one is used for not. So if username is not equal to user.username and or we can use or password, or maybe we use email is not equal to user dot email. For this case here, we are going to have the code of block to be executed. Say for example, we say for this case it's going to be the inverse of the above one. We're going to display that one. But else, if it matches, that is because for this our first case we've said if this one does not match and the second one does not match, then we are going to tell the user record not found. Otherwise, if the record was found, otherwise the code of block to be executed, it means the record was found. So we display console.log the record was found. So this is how we are going to utilize these ternary operators a lot more in our React. And now, for example, just to give an example that has both the two logics that we provided, we have for example maybe a React section, for example, say maybe const. You just don't have to worry about all this I'm typing because we are going to learn it more deeper. I'm just using it to give you an example, a real example. So this is which type of a function. For example, you can just give it a try. Maybe you give it in the comment section. So this is a function that has a return value, and I never talked about return value. Return values, these are what is going to be given back after the code is executed. For example, if we were to calculate the sum of two numbers and we are getting it from a function, say sum. So this sum, for example, let me give it a quick one here. Const, say I have a function sum somewhere declared, and I just want to have the sum of maybe 2 and 3 calculated in that function. How am I going to get the result back? I can choose to have a return type, maybe to return the sum of the two numbers. For example, if I just declared the function somewhere else, I provided declaration, and I'm going to have, maybe I use a let my sum be equal to sum, and then you open and close the bracket, you provide the first and the second. For this instance, this 1 and 2 are arguments to this our function. Somewhere we just define the function, and the arguments are what you feed into the function that are going to be used within the function to provide an output for this instance. So this function is going to return the sum of 1 and 2. And the sum of 1 and 2 is going to be somewhere in the logic. We say 1 plus 2, and then we find it's 3. This 3 is it's what is going to be returned from this function, and then it's going to be stored in my sum for this instance. So somewhere else, if I just console log my sum, it's going to give me 3, because that is what is a return type. But in React, we just return what we call a JSX. A JSX. This is a JavaScript XML. That is, for this instance, we are going to return a JavaScript functions mixed with HTML. For this instance, say we are going to return maybe a p-tag like this, which is going to display for us, say hello, or maybe it's going to check for this instance. Let's use this example. We just provide here user. Maybe we fetched it from somewhere, fetch from somewhere, our from some backend somewhere, say http / full colon and blah 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 .com. Yeah, that one. So we fetch data from this one, and this data we are going to assign it to, say, for example, a variable that is called user. We assign all this data to a variable called user. Const, maybe let user for this case, and this user, we are going to pass it as an argument to this function, which we are going to use in our code. For example, if I just wanted to perform the validations we provided above, I'm going to use this ternary operator for this instance. If I use, for example, this, if this one matches or this one does not match this way, I can have it, the logic here, just within the function that we provided, like this. So it's going to I've just saved it and it's reformatted. It's going to test if that the username that we provided in our code matches the username that is in the user that we passed dot username. This is an object called user that is going to have username and the email. Then we are going to console log this one, you see. But what if we wanted to display here, we wanted to return that if he's not logged in, we just tell him to sign up. But if he is not meeting this condition, we just tell him to sign up. But if he meets, we are just going to tell him sign out for this instance. So I can copy it this way, and we have it as this condition here. So if username does not match with username and email does not match with this one, we just provide a ternary operator which returns a button for this case that is going to tell us login. For this case, log in. Otherwise, log in, I mean. Or else for this case, we are going to tell the user to log out because he has logged in. This is just but a simple code snippet from the maybe how the function works, how the ternary operator we are going to use it. We tell him to sign up for this case. So if we are just checking if the user is available, let me put it in its own page so that it can be clear here. So this is what we are going to use for this instance. Let me eliminate this logic here. So this is what we are going to get for this our case here. It's going to have a function here that tests on this condition. If this condition is not met, because we are just saying if username does not match and if email does not match, we are going to return a button of login. Otherwise, we are going to return a button here, say logout, log out, because it must have met the condition for this case. This is just but an example of how we use it in React. I've just talked about objects, and let's now look at objects. Objects, these are real world entities that are represented in a program. For this instance, we can have an object as a variable const, maybe user for this case, and user is an object. We use this parenthesis, and it uses what we call a key value pair this way. So for this instance, if I just wanted to represent maybe me in this program, we can have the key as a name, and then the value for name, we are going to have it as Tony for this case. So this is the key for the user, and the value to that key is username. So that somewhere within our code, if I say user dot name, I'm going to access in the user object, that is this, and then the name of that user within that object for this instance. Let me remove this one. So we are having this way. And if I have maybe age, that is, say I'm 25 years old, and then what else? We can have maybe a password for this case, or maybe religion for this case, and then I can have a string, that is, for example, Christian for this our case here. So this is an object called user, and this object called user is having the following properties. The username for this, the user properties for this instance, it's me. My name is Tony, I'm 25 years, and I'm a Christian for this case. We are going to look at how we use this one later in our program. And then we have something else called an array. An array is a list of, it's a collection of data of similar data type. For example, we may have an array of fruits. For this instance, let me use const fruits for this case. Const fruits, and then I'm going to assign it to an array for this case, and then the array is going to have maybe orange, and it's going to have another maybe passion, it's going to have another, it's separated with a comma, it's going to have maybe, for some reason, say we had a long array of fruits, and for some reason we just forgot and repeated to type orange. So it also accept a repetition of the variable. It does not provide an error. Say we have maybe mango, for example, mango, and yeah, and we can have maybe avocado for this case. So this is an array of fruits that it's going to have orange, passion, and for some reason you repeated orange, it does not give any error. And then we have mango and we have avocado. We can also have an array of object. For this case, we can say, for example, const, we have an array of users this way, and these users are going to be objects. For this case, say user one, for this we are going to have maybe name as Tony. For this case, we are going to have age as 25, and we are going to have the next object here. We must have this as maybe name. For example, we have name Claire, and then we can have age as maybe 21. Yeah, so we are having an object, an array of object. For this case, if you can just reformat it this way, I've just saved it. So for just easy readability, I'm having an array of fruits which has similar data type, that is orange, which is a string. We have passion, which is a string, up to avocado. For this second one, we are having an array. This is an array, if you see this square bracket, of objects, because we talked about object above here, of object. And the first object is Tony, and the second object is Claire, with the name and the key value pairs, the so-called dictionaries in Python, for those with knowledge about Python. So these are the two things we are going to be used frequently in our React beginning the next tutorial. And we are also going to look at, lastly, what we call functions that are going to be useful. For example, we have the map function, and we are having the filter function, and we are also having the reduce functions here in JavaScript, which are also used in React. We are going to look at map and filter, because reduce, it's much not really used in most cases. But how are we going to use this map? These two are going to be used where we can iterate. Iterate means we are having an array of something. Maybe for this instance, we are having fruit and we are having users. For example, a map function is used to traverse through an array. Like you just go through an array, as maybe you perform some functions. Say for this instance, for example, if I can just give an example, we can map through the fruit array for this instance. So I just write fruit, because we defined it above here, and then if we just map through fruit.map, and this has an anonymous function. Now we are going to meet with anonymous function. Anonymous functions, these are functions with no username, because for some reason you are not going to use it somewhere else within the code. So it's going to be having this anonymous function. Say you use it function, we declare it using a function keyword, and then we are going to have the body of that function, where, for example, you are going to console.log some data in this function. But how are we going to use this map function? This map function has a callback function, that is this anonymous function, and this anonymous function is going to be assigned one of the values within the array. For this instance, maybe say fruit in singular for this case. So if I map through this array, this function here, this callback function, is going to be executed each time we move to the next item in the array. For this instance, if we are mapping through orange, then the fruit at hand is orange, but we use it the variable fruit to represent orange. And if we move to the next item, we are going to have passion. Passion is going to be stored inside our fruit, so that we are going to do something with our passion. The next up to the last one. So for this instance, if I just decide to console.log fruit, it means for each case I'm just going to uh, display for the if this function is executed first, it's going to be displaying orange. It will display orange here, and then the next one is going to display is passion during the next execution of this function. The same applies up to avocado. If it was for this username, it's going to display this first array. For this case, let me maybe say maybe add a comment here for objects objects array. For this instance is our user. Say for this instance is user. We are just going to display it this way. During our first iteration, it's going to display this kind of information. It's going to say name, and then it just displays Tony, and then with my age as 25. And then during the second execution, it's going to display just the same, but for the second user, that is the username as Claire and age as 21. So that is how it's used. We are going to have the filter one. For the filter, if we just decide to use the filter for this instance, if I want to just filter the fruit array, we may want to filter it using a given condition. That is, we want to filter out everything in the array minus some condition, or maybe that meets the given condition. For this instance, let's filter out oranges from this array so that we remain with passion, mango, and avocado. So we are going to just use the fruit array, and then we filter the fruit array by it also has a callback function that also will contain a variable for each iteration. That is, maybe say fruit for this case. And this function we just used for this second example, we just used an anonymous function, that is an arrow function. For this case, if you just see this arrow, you will automatically know this is an arrow function. And then we are going to filter everything in the array. For this case, say I'm going to console .log everything in the array. We are just going to console.log everything in the array that does not meet a given condition. For this case, we are just going to use maybe the ternary operator. For this our case, if I say fruit, if fruit is not equal to orange, then let me use this first one, and then we console dot log what we call the fruit. Now the fruit. So this function, how is it working? It means we are calling a filter function on the fruit array, and to it we pass a variable called fruit, which is going to handle the fruit we are handling at hand. For our first iteration, it's going to take the fruit orange in our fruit variable. We are going to test the fruit orange. If orange is not equal to orange, then we display it. You see, so for this case, we are going to have orange is not equal to orange. We are not going to display it because it's false, because orange matches orange. So we are not going to display the fruit. We are going to the second, which is passion. Passion is not equal to orange. Then what do? We execute the console log. So we display the fruit for this case, and so on and so forth. These are the key things that we need to know about JavaScript for us to get started with React. And finally, to close with, we are just going to learn about imports and exports. These are keywords that are used in JavaScript. We are going to learn how we can just use a function somewhere else in another file, or maybe some logic somewhere else in another file. And I think in the next tutorial, I'll be able to explain these two terms well and how they are used. And also we're going to look at what we call async, await. It's used with await, wait, and then we have finally the fetch. For this case, these are tools that are very useful in our program. In the next tutorial, I'm going to display at least twice in a week, or once in a week. So an async, also, if I can just give a clue of how it works, this is a function that has to be asynchronous to so that if I can just think it in a way that if I'm fetching something from somewhere, I just have to declare it as an async, because this function returns a promise. So we have to await for the promise to be delivered. And this promise, what makes us have this promise is what we are fetching. So if we are fetching something from somewhere, it means we are returning some value from somewhere. So we are going to understand these two concepts in our next lesson. And as at now, if you find this knowledge useful, you can just like, subscribe, and share. I'll massively appreciate if you just subscribe into this channel, and thank you for this course.